Jag bara tänker lite så vi får något. Om jag måste snabbt så får man
exakt. Ja, jag lägger mig så att jag ser de stolarna.
Ja. Det är en av de eventuella Nobelpristagarna. Jag försöker se smart ut. De går med här plats.
Jag ska ta en bild
på mig.
Wskazujemy jako prawda, dass Buch Det finns ju flera stycken namn i mixen. Amerikanen Michael Woodford till exempel, som har forskat en hel del om hur centralbanker kan och bör agera. Med tanke på inflationen de senaste åren så kanske det är en bra tidpunkt för honom. Vi får se. En annan amerikan som det pratats mycket om är Susan Athey. Hon är en forskare inom digitala marknadsplatser. Det har hon specialiserat sig på, till exempel Google och eBay. Men det talas också om att hon kanske vid blott 53 år gammal är lite för ung för att få det här priset. Detsamma gäller den franska ekonomen Thomas Piketty, som ju forskat väldigt mycket inom ojämlikhet. Han är också 53 år gammal. Det har pratats med en svensk också inför årets pris. Torsten Persson, 70 år gammal, verksam vid Stockholms universitet har han varit, och om han får priset i år så blir han den tredje svensken någonsin och den första sedan 1977 att få det här ekonomipriset. Sist men absolut inte minst är den turkisk-amerikanska ekonomen Daron Acemoglu. Honom har det pratats om en hel del de senaste åren, och många säger att det kanske är dags för honom nu den här gången. Vi får väl se. Han har gjort väldigt mycket forskning om ojämlikhet och om hur länder blir framgångsrika och om hur utvecklingsländer kan bli framgångsrika. Så det är många namn i mixen, men det kommer säkert bli någon helt annan bara för att förbereda alla de där.
Välkommen till Kungliga Vetenskapsakademin och den här presskonferensen då vi ska presentera Sveriges riksbanks pris i ekonomisk vetenskap till Alfred Nobels minne. Welcome to this press conference when we will present the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences Prize, Sveriges riksbanks prize in economic sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel. We will keep to our tradition and start the presentation in Swedish and then continue in English. And you're of course welcome to ask questions in either language later on. Jag heter Hans Ellegren och är ständig sekreterare här på Kungliga Vetenskapsakademin. Till höger om mig sitter professor Jakob Svensson, ordförande för priskommittén för Sveriges riksbanks pris i ekonomisk vetenskap till Alfred Nobels minne. Och till vänster om mig sitter professor Jan Theorell, ledamot i priskommittén och expert i ämnet. My name is Hans Ellegren. I'm the Secretary General of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. And to my right is Professor Jakob Svensson, Chair of the Prize Committee for the Sveriges Riksbanks Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel. And to my left, Professor Jan Theorell, member of the Prize Committee and an expert in this field. Årets pris handlar om att förstå skillnader i välstånd mellan länder. This year's prize is about understanding differences in prosperity between nations. Kungliga Vetenskapsakademin har idag beslutat att utdela Sveriges riksbankspris i ekonomisk vetenskap till Alfred Nobels minne för 2024 till Daron Acemoglu, MIT, Cambridge, USA, Simon Johnson, MIT, Cambridge, USA och James Robinson, University of Chicago, USA, för studier av hur institutioner formas och påverkar välstånd. The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences has decided to award Sveriges Riksbanks Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel for 2024 to Daron Acemoglu, MIT, Cambridge, USA, Simon Johnson, MIT, Cambridge, USA, and James Robinson, University of Chicago, USA, for studies of how institutions are formed and affect prosperity. Professor Jakob Svensson will now give us a short summary. Please, Jakob.
Thank you. Global inequality is largely driven by differences in average income across countries. But why are some countries poor while others prosper? And why are the gaps between poor and rich nations so persistent? These are not new questions, but they are among the most urgent in the social sciences. And addressing them is extremely challenging. This year's laureates have pioneered new approaches, both empirical and theoretical, that have significantly advanced our understanding of global inequality. On the empirical side, their work has greatly enhanced the study of the causal effects of institution on prosperity. In so doing, they have identified the historical roots of the weak institutional environments that characterize many low-income countries today. On the theoretical side, their research explains why extractive economic institutions and dictatorships often persist, even though reforming them would benefit most. It also outlines conditions under which institutions are likely to change. Reducing the huge differences in income between countries is one of our time's greatest challenges. Thanks to Daron Acemoglu, Simon Johnson, and James Robinson's groundbreaking research, we have a much deeper understanding of the root causes of why countries fail or succeed.
Thank you, Jakob. Professor Theorell, are you ready to give us more details about the prize?
Yes. Thank you very much. Today, the 20% richest countries in the world are about 30 times richer than the poorest 20%. And this income gap is quite persistent. So although the poorer countries are of course becoming richer, they're not closing the gap. Why is this the case? Backwards. Sorry. Acemoglu, Johnson, and Robinson have shown that a large part of this income gap is due to differences in economic and political institutions in society. And they depart from a very broad definition of institutions as the rules of the game in society, structuring the incentives in human exchange. More precisely, they make it a distinction between, on the one hand, inclusive institutions, such as broadly protected property rights and democracy, and on the other, extractive institutions, which more implies large risks of expropriation and autocracy. And what they have demonstrated is that inclusive institutions are good for growth and long-run prosperity, whereas extractive institutions lead to poverty. How do you provide evidence for that kind of claim? This is really difficult task. To begin with, a large many factors both affect what societal institutions you have and whether you get prosperity or not. And to control for all this in a single study is close to impossible. It's also the case that many things that you might think are a cause of prosperity could actually be a consequence, making it even more difficult. And these empirical challenges aside, you also need a really good theory to understand what institutions are, how they persist, and why they sometimes change. Empirically, the laureates met these challenges by studying a huge intervention in human history, the colonization of large parts of the world by the Europeans, starting in the 16th century and onward. What they showed was that as a result of colonization, there were huge differences in economic and political institutions that arose in the colonized parts of the world, largely due to how many Europeans actually settled in the colonies. So the more settlers you had, the more you had to establish institutions that were good for investment. By very creatively using data on mortality rates of soldiers, bishops, sailors stationed in these colonies, the laureates were able to show that one of the things that largely impacted on how many settlers actually settled was the disease environment in the colonies. So the lower settler mortality, the more Europeans actually settled, and the more inclusive institutions they established for the benefit of the settlers. But the more deadlier diseases there were in the colonies, such as malaria or yellow fever, the fewer Europeans actually settled. And that meant that the Europeans either took over or established extractive institutions for the benefit of a narrow elite at the expense of the wider population. And this led then to this long-run effect on prosperity. Another thing the laureates showed was that as a result of colonization, there was a reversal of fortune. And this graph illustrates this reversal. So what you have here on the x-axis is a measure of prosperity before colonization, the year of 1500, it's urbanization rate. And on the y-axis, you have a measure of the same around the time when they did this study, that is the mid-1990s, GDP per capita. And what you can see here is that countries that were richer before colonization, to the right here, have now become relatively poorer. Whereas countries that were poorer at the time of colonization have now become relatively richer. And this, again, is in large part due to the inclusive institutions that the settlers established in these then formerly poorer countries. But taking a step back, in order to understand this, the laureates not only had to make an empirical contribution, but also a theoretical one. Because if you think about it, and if you rule over a poor country, why don't you just take the institutions that you know are good for growth? Growth would be best for everyone. Why don't you just introduce these inclusive institutions instead of the extractive ones? To answer this question, the laureates developed a series of game theoretical models. And these models center around the conflict between the rich elite, ruling elite, and the poorer masses, and a problem of credibility between those two groups. So to simplify things, the elite, here represented by the king in his tower, could, for example, promise economic reforms. They could promise more protected property rights for the people. But this promise is not credible as long as the king or the elite remains in power, that is, as long as they don't change the political institutions. Because as long as they don't do that, the poor knows that the rich could just steal back from them whatever assets they have accumulated in the future. So this promise, or the economic reforms, are not credible, and this also means that countries with extractive institutions get trapped in a situation with a rich elite and poorer masses. And this is called the commitment problem in this literature. This commitment problem, interestingly, is also part of the explanation for why institutions sometimes do change. One of the things that ordinary people have, also in non-democratic settings, although they lack formal political power, is the power to mobilize. So what the ordinary people can do is threaten with a revolution. This could, but does not have to be violent. Under such a threat, the elites in these countries face a difficult dilemma. They would like to cling on to power, so the king in his tower there, he would again start promising economic reforms to make peace with the people. But these promises are not credible. Because again, the people know that as soon as the situation calms down, the elites can just swiftly turn back to the old system. So under this situation, the only option for the elite could actually be to hand over power, introduce democracy, here represented by the king handing over the crown to the ordinary people. So, to sum up, Acemoglu, Johnson and Robinson have both made an empirical and a theoretical contribution that has hugely impacted on later research in these fields. On the theoretical side, they have given us much better understanding for how institutions are formed, that is, how they, why they persist and under what circumstances they sometimes change. And on the empirical side, they have shown this huge impact of institutions on prosperity. And although they don't provide any simple recipes or have any concrete policy proposals, this of course also has huge societal impact. To just mention one, their insights show us that work on promoting democracy, more inclusive institutions, is an important way forward for promoting economic development and closing the world income gap. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Theorell. I believe we might have Professor Daron Acemoglu online here. Are you with us, Professor Acemoglu?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, and please accept our warmest congratulations.
Thank you. I am delighted. It's just a real shock and amazing news. Thank you.
Yeah, so you feel okay right now?
I am completely fine, yes.
Yeah. Here at the press conference, I believe we have many interested journalists, both from Sweden and from the international press. Would you be ready to take some questions from them?
Of course, I would be delighted.
Okay. Who would like to start? Yes, please.
Hello, this is Bogdan Radajewski from the Polish television. Congratulations, Professor.
Thank you.
What I'm wondering and what I wanted to ask, because at first glance you could see the results of your work and your research as a simple recommendation that democracy means economic growth. Is it really that simple? And how, in that regard, would you explain countries like China, who are not democracies, yet they have experienced tremendous economic growth in the past decades? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think broadly speaking, the work that we have done favors democracy. And in follow-up work that I have done with Pasqua Restrepo, Suresh Naidu, and James Robinson, we specifically look at the democracy problem as well and find that countries that democratize, starting from non-democratic regimes do ultimately grow in about 8-9 years faster than non-democratic regimes, and it's a substantial gain. But democracy is not a panacea. Introducing democracy is very hard. When you introduce elections, that sometimes creates conflict, and in particular, in already polarized societies, elections can lead to short-lived outcomes that are sometimes not democratic in nature, in the sense that one party gains power and in an authoritarian way implements things. And there are pathways via which non-democratic countries can actually grow. It's something that James Robinson and I have emphasized a lot in our book, Why Nations Fail, what we call extractive growth. Countries can put resources, rapidly mobilize resources for their existing sectors, existing firms, and that can lead to a pickup in growth. But our argument has been that this sort of authoritarian growth is often more unstable and doesn't generally lead to very rapid and original innovation. And of course, China is a bit of a challenge because it has recently started pouring a lot of investment and other resources into some sectors such as AI. But I think my perspective is generally that these authoritarian regimes, for a variety of reasons, are going to have a harder time in achieving sort of long-term sustainable innovation outcomes.
More questions? Maybe I can ask a question. What was your personal reaction when we reached you on phone?
Oh, well, surprise and shock, but this is a real good coincidence in the sense that I'm in Athens right now, so it's not 5 o'clock in the morning for me. It's 1 hour ahead of your time, so it was easier to absorb than it might have been if I was in my usual place.
Yeah. So you are in Athens now?
Yes, I am in Athens, Greece, correct.
Yes, please.
Professor Acemoglu, my name is Marcus Carlson Boriu. I'm from the Swedish broadcaster TV4. I was just wondering if you could explain to a layperson very, very simply what your research is about and what you have achieved through your research.
Well, I think the Nobel Committee gave a better summary than I can, but I think the most broad framing of some of the research that was cited there is we try to trace the roots of certain institutional trajectories to the colonial past. And rather than asking whether colonialism is good or bad, we note that different colonial strategies have led to different institutional patterns that have persisted over time, and then we trace those institutional choices that Europeans have made to a variety of factors, but quite importantly to these environments that determine whether Europeans settled, what types of colonization resources they brought in, and what kind of strategies they adopted. And those persistent effects led to a real institutional divergence throughout the last 500 years, and then we are able to trace out some of the consequences of these institutional historical outcomes.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for that. It's Marcus Carlson Boriu again. I'm just wondering, your name has been in the mix quite a lot throughout recent years when it comes to the Economics Prize. Were you doubting that this prize would come?
You never expect something like this, I think, was it Napoleon who said, when you go into officer cadet school, you dream of becoming a general, but not a president or king. So, you dream of having a good career, but this is over and on top of that. So it's a great surprise and honor.
Okay, this seems to be the last question from the press for you, Professor Acemoglu.
Thank you.
Was there one more? Yeah, sorry, one more, please.
Of course.
I think it was actually there in the back.
Thank you. Congratulations, Professor. Paul Rees from Al Jazeera English. Could you just sort of clarify again in terms of a before and after state, why colonialism is such a good test for this?
Well, I think it's not that there is anything in the nature of colonialism that makes it sort of a good test, but what colonialism did was it transformed the institutions, the organization of many societies around the world, starting sometime around 1500. And these were both different outcomes within the colonial world, and because they were so deeply affecting the organization of these societies, they had very persistent effects. So in some sense, to us, colonialism is interesting in and of itself. It's one of the most significant things, but it was also a natural experiment that divided the world into very different institutional trajectories.
Was it some more there? Yeah, please.
Yes, hello. This is Carl-Johan von Seth from the Swedish daily Dagens Nyheter. Congratulations, Professor Asemoglu.
Thank you.
Can you comment on how you assess the current quality and current trajectory of institutions in the world, if you look at your current home country, the United States, or other countries in the world right now?
Well, I mean, I think this is actually another topic that I am researching, and it's fascinating but worrying. If you look at data that international organizations such as Freedom House, VDEM, or others collect, they see that institutions everywhere, including in the United States, including some European countries, and in many parts of the emerging world, are getting weaker and weaker. If you look at data from surveys that ask people their views about authoritarianism, dictatorship, democracy, and so on, you see that that support for democracy among the population is at an all-time low. So that suggests that despite the potential for democracy to spearhead rapid growth and consensus around difficult choices, we are not probably achieving that full potential. And in fact, my evidence also suggests that democracies particularly underperform when the population thinks that they underdeliver. They don't rise up to their promises in terms of providing good governance, control corruption, limit inequality, create shared poverty, shared prosperity, and so on. So I think this is a time when democracies are going through a rough patch, and it is in some sense quite crucial that they reclaim the high ground of better governance, cleaner governance, and delivering sort of the promise of democracy to a broad range of people.
Thank you.
No, I don't see any more questions. Again, thank you very much, Professor Asemoglu, and again, our warmest congratulations. We look forward to see you here in Stockholm in December for the Nobel Prize ceremony.
Thank you very much. I am looking forward to that as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so let's move on. If there are questions about the prize in economic sciences or the research involved to the committee, and again, you can ask questions in Swedish or in English. Please. I see no questions. So then we end here. Thank you for attending, and look forward to see you then when we have press conferences in December with the laureates present here. Thank you.